Hi, y'all. It's Moon Griffon. Welcome to the Moon Griffon podcast. Boy, I tell you about all the stuff happening with the banking business. Some people are tripping out. Some people are saying, "Hey, let's be cool." And I'm talking about Silicon Valley. Don't go nowhere. I got a great guest. Don't forget to check us out, the Moon Griffon podcast, and make sure you tell a friend and all the friends that you can about the Moon Griffon podcast. All right, Dr. Antoni was my special guest today on my radio program with the Heritage Foundation. He's an economist, and he's a really, really good one, a smart guy. Dr. Antoni, how you doing, sir?
Moon, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
No, it is a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to have you on. And much like with the radio program, I want to go back to the Silicon Valley deal. And I want you to kind of start off from the beginning and kind of let people know what took place. In your opinion, is this going to be something that we're getting ready to see like in 2008 or and some people are freaking out saying Great Depression? I don't want to go that far, but I do want to talk about it a little bit to see where we are today. But the Silicon Valley, like people in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas and other parts of the country, really don't have to worry about that right now. Am I correct?
Those are great questions. And figuring out how we got here kind of helps us figure out like whether or not this is going to be a Great Depression or another 2008 or whatever. So let's start there. How did we get here? Well, we're talking about a bank that was extremely risky, right? It was very mismanaged. And the risks that they exposed themselves to were fortunately things that a lot of other banks, especially big banks, are very, very well protected against. The biggest thing that this bank did was it basically relied on interest rates staying super low, essentially forever, because as soon as those rates started to go up, their clients to basically withdraw funds from the bank. But at the same time, they also had a lot of debt that was dependent upon low interest rates. Otherwise, they were not. They essentially were not going to be able to maintain the value of their portfolio. So that's basically a very fancy way of saying, as interest rates rise, this bank becomes insolvent, and that's exactly what happened. And so, as a consequence of that, sorry, go ahead.
No, yes, sir. Go ahead. You go.
As a consequence of that, regulators have stepped in and said, okay, we need to shut this thing down. And we're also going to take the unprecedented step of guaranteeing all these people's deposits. Now, at first, you may say, well, that sounds perfectly fine, right? If you have money deposited at a bank, you should be able to get it. Well, we already have something called federal deposit insurance, which guarantees up to $250,000 of each individual person's deposit.
By the way, let me ask a quick question about the 250. Didn't that go up after 2008? Wasn't it a little bit lower than that? And they actually raised that? Or has it always been 250?
No. I mean, it started out as only a few $1,000s, and it has steadily been raised and raised and raised as the years went on. And you're right, in the last financial crisis, they raised it again to get up to the current limit.
But you don't think we at that point like we were in 2008 right now, correct?
No, not system wide. No, because the kinds of risks that this bank exposed itself and its customers to were not widespread. In other words, we don't have the Wells Fargos, the Bank of Americas, JP Morgans. We don't have a lot of those big institutions with the same kind of risk exposure. But what's really frustrating about all this is that the bank knew the risks they were taking. The depositors at this bank are not the normal average Joe depositors. We're talking about disproportionately millionaires. Only about 5% of people in this bank had deposits below $250,000. We are talking about a lot of money here. I don't mean a lot of money just in general, but each individual client with a lot of money. The clients, the depositors knew their risks. The investors knew their risks, and they basically ignored them. And now the taxpayers bailing them out.
Well, let me ask this quick question. Do you think behind the scenes they knew that they were in trouble weeks or months, and they just go behind the scenes with the players to be and say, hey, we're having a problem, and if this continues to go, we're going to need some help? You think it worked like that behind the scenes? There's no way to say yes or no.
It's a great question. Maybe if they had a risk management officer for the last 9 months, we'd be able to tell that, but they didn't even have that. I mean, it really does seem like these people threw caution into the wind. As just one example, they had financial securities in their portfolio, which essentially protected against the interest rate risk, which eventually brought down the bank. What happened? They sold them all off for a profit. So they took the short-term gain in exchange for a virtual guarantee that they were going to go bankrupt in the long run. I mean, that to me smacks of they knew what they were doing.
Yeah, well, that's the reason why I asked that question. The problem is, and I'm just throwing this at you, is that any kind of regulators or anybody from the federal government, because Joe Biden's already basically said we're going to bail them out, it seems like to me there must have been Democrat Party donors, people that would vote Democrat, people that would invest with the Democrat Party and Joe Biden, because if there's anything behind the scenes, the feds probably knew, and they said, hey, don't worry about it, we'll take care of you. Because you got to admit, when it comes to the federal government, they do not care about spending our money. They don't have a problem with it at all. They spending your kids and your grandkids and your grandkids' money right now. So they really don't care if they got to bail out $1 trillion or $500 billion. They don't care.
Right. No, they absolutely don't care. And what's really crazy is the fact that a lot of these businesses, these small tech firms, these venture capital firms, these startups, a lot of them were disproportionately these so-called green energy firms, which were financed at least in part by what was known as the Inflation Reduction Act, which Biden signed last year, right? Which was not inflation reduction. It's fueling inflation with all that extra spending. But you basically had businesses they used taxpayer dollars to help start them. They failed, and now they're using taxpayer dollars again to help bail out the owners. I mean, this is just This is so ridiculous. You can't make this stuff up.
No, they back in the Obama administration, Solyndra, what was it, 300 million, 500 million, whatever. It was going to be this green, and it just went away. And so I'm asking you, because the number I got was 1,500 companies that went into the Green New Deal. And I'm trying to think, 1,500 companies, how can this happen? And yet I'm looking at this going, is each one of these companies in trouble now? Are most of these companies in trouble now because of what took place? Is that saying none of them have money now? It's a bust? Or can you really not read that bigger picture?
A lot of them should have been in trouble because they gave their money to an institution which mismanaged it, right? I mean, they should be in trouble. And instead, the taxpayer, again, is going to bail them out. So as if it wasn't bad enough that they got billions of dollars to help start these companies, they messed up, and now they're getting billions more to save them. No, this is Solyndra on steroids.
No, by the way, I'm glad you said that, Dr. Antoni. I believe that too. They put all this money out. It's going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. Everybody makes their money up front. But in the big picture, we end up losing. We lose the money. Somebody puts some money in their pocket. You can book it. And yet this is what we call a Green New Deal. This is what we call our new economy. But we're gonna be broke in a very short time buying this.
Absolutely. We are throwing good money after bad at this point. And the idea that, the fact that the president had the audacity to get up there today and say that this is not going to cost taxpayers a dime, where do you think the money is coming from? It's not as if the federal government has any money of its own. That's our money. You are spending our money. And it adds insult to injury when you put out talking points like that, as if we're too dumb to know the difference.
That's a question. You're economists. We're about 32, 34 trillion in debt. If you look at the budget, in about 3 years, we're going to be at 40 trillion. I saw one budget in 9 years, we're going to be at 51 trillion. When does this bubble burst? When does this just blow up in our face? And the thing about it is, I know it's going to blow up in our face, and you do too. But when? Because most people, if it's not blown up yet, they don't care. They just keep doing the same thing. When it blows up, it's too late at that point.
Right. Moon, it's a really, really great question. And frankly, I think conservatives have lost a lot of credibility on the debt issue because for several decades now, they have been basically picking arbitrary numbers and saying, once the debt gets this big, or once the debt is this percent of GDP, whatever the case may be, whatever measurement you want to use, they say once it gets to this point, it's the point of no return, it's Armageddon, and we're hosed, and then it's game over. And the problem is that point of no return has proven different for different countries in different places of the world at different points in history. So there is no magical number as if once we get there, it's game over. We don't know where that point is. But that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we turn this big old battleship around now before it's too late, because eventually you do get to the point where your momentum will just take you over the falls.
You can't get to a place to turn around if you don't get to a place to stop it. We have not even thought about stopping or slowing the train down. If you're doing 80 miles an hour, you don't hit the brakes and stop. You basically go 80, 70, 60. You just go slow down, stop, and then turn around. We're not doing that with our finance. And I'm like you. I'm not even a Republican. I'm a conservative. And I get so upset at the party because when it's their turn to lead, they basically do the same thing the other side's doing, except a little bit slower. Instead of going 80, 90 miles an hour over the cliff, they're doing 75. That right there is our problem. We're dealing with politicians and lobbyists. And I got to tell you, the lobbyists probably worse than the politician.
You know what? It's a really great point. And sadly, the Republican Party of late has basically shown themselves to be not conservatives, but just liberals going the speed limit.
I'll tell you what you do. Come in Louisiana, I can show you a bunch of the same type people. They'll stab you in the back and smile at you. They'll steal your false teeth and walk down the hall and smile with your teeth in their mouth. I'm telling you, I've never seen anything like it. I don't want to get too far off the subject, but I want to ask a tough question for you. I don't want to live through a depression. My gut feeling is you don't want to live through a depression. If you go read about the depression years, it took a minimum of about 10 years to get back on your feet. And my question to you is, I don't think this bank deal right now, not scare anybody, nothing to do with that. But up the road, you keep printing money, coming up with things like the Green New Deal, which is based off the biggest lie. Can we hit another depression? And is that one of those things that just happens, like you said, and once it happens, we're there? Well, I don't think we ought to do that. If we quit spending money, quit printing money, and quit handing out money to everybody, I think we could stop it. But I don't see anybody with the heart and soul to stop it.
Those are really, really great questions. We talk about the Great Depression as if it was an event that just started suddenly, as if the stock market crash in October of 1929 set the ball rolling and there was nothing that could be done to stop it. The Depression took several years to set in. And it also took several years of continued monetary malfeasance at the Federal Reserve and continued fiscal imprudence by Congress and the president to make the decade-long depression possible. And so at any point, any of those institutions could have acted differently and could have, as we were saying, slowed the train down and eventually started going the other direction. Is another depression possible? Sure. Anything's possible. I hate to say that, but it's true.
Well, no.
So that is all the more reason why we need to start moving in the right direction now and not wait any longer.
Dr. Antoni, my special guest with the Heritage Foundation. Doc, I agree 100% with you. I'm not trying to scare anybody. That's not what I do. Okay. But what I want to do is to tell people, look, there's warning signs out there of some major problems up the road. I don't know if up the road is tomorrow or 2 months from now, 2 years from now, 20 years. But why would you ever want to walk to that line? And I'm going to tell you what, having to believe in a politician and the guys, all other people that are involved around politics, it scares me. We got lawyers, politicians, and lobbyists. And I got to tell you, there's nobody I trust with those three. And I'm not saying there's not some good ones, and you would say the same thing. Not enough good ones. And when you wear a suit and tie, it don't mean you're a good person and you're a smart person and you love this country. That's you can put the suit and tie on all you want to. It does not mean you love this country. Will we ever have a leader step up and say enough is enough?
Well, frankly, I would throw economists in that group as well, But that's beside the point.
Some of them.
Maybe both, but neither here nor there. Look, at the end of the day, politicians and everyone really, not just politicians, everyone operates on their own self-interest, right? Correct. We all operate based on incentives. And for politicians, the incentive is to get reelected. And so what we need to do is we need to exert the right amount of political pressure on our politicians so that they know that the only way they are going to get reelected is if they do the right thing, if they do what we want them to. And if they do anything else, they need to know that they're going to get voted out of office. And they need to know that we have more votes than the special interest does. And until we make that clear to the politicians, I'm not sure anything will change.
No, and you know, it's funny. I got a saying now, not Republicans and Democrats. I call them ins and outs, literally ins and outs. Whoever's in, we want to get rid of because they're not doing what's right. So we take the outs and make them the ins, and now they're in charge. The ins are out. And then we look up somewhere in the process, they're doing the same thing. So a few years up the road, we want to kick them out, put the other ones back in. And it's just a revolving door. And that tells me whoever's in charge, they get to spend the money. They get to have the power. They get to have control. And let's be blunt. A lot of these guys end up being lobbyists, or their family members are lobbyists. And they don't even understand a life that I live. You know, back home, I got a special need daughter. I had 4 children. One of them is working. He's 21. The other ones are working and have babies and wives, at least one wife. and I live a different world. I don't live in a political world. I live in reality. My gut feeling is you do too. But these people make so much money and around so much money in a different lifestyle. I think they forget who they were when they were back home.
Good. I think that's a really, really fair assessment. You have people who have forgotten where they came from, or they were born with the proverbial silver spoon in their mouths, and so they have no idea. They never even knew in the first place what it was like to be an average American. And I mean, you need look no further than the net worth of these people. How is it someone can go to Congress, make $100,000 or $200,000 a year, and in only a few years have their net worth explode from virtually nothing to tens of millions of dollars? I mean, there is clearly more money being exchanged than simply a salary here.
Oh, no. And I tell you something else. When you sit in that powerful position, you do stuff for people. So when you get out, you become really, really wealthy. And Louisiana, you realize we had very few congressmen or senators, United States senators, that once they were elected and they spent a lot of time in D.C., most of them never come home, ever. And some of them may come back home to live here one day after they retire from their lobbyist gig. And, it's just frustrating. Like I said, I don't want to scare anybody, Dr. Antoni. I'm just stating a point. When we look at what happened with the bank, that another bank in New York, and to me, it's the fundamentals of finances of a country or whatever is so totally thrown out the window. And now everybody, including the private sector, if their ship comes in, that's all that matters. And I'm telling you, that's not the way to look at this.
No, certainly you're absolutely right. And at the end of the day, we just desperately need to get our financial house in order as a country. We have to. I'll
close with this, Dr. Antoni. First of all, if people want to get in touch with you, how can they get in touch with you and see your work?
They can find me at heritage.org, but you can also follow me on Twitter for all kinds of breaking news and the latest updates at Real EJ Antoni.
This is a sad note what I'm getting ready to end on. They aborted 63 million babies. I just wonder if the good Lord sent one or two or 3 or 4 good leaders, great leaders in that had been aborted that we never got to see come along that would have changed the country. One man can make a difference as the good Lord did. And it's amazing. But anyway, look, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
We'll do it again soon. I appreciate it. Folks, that's it. Check out the Moon Griffon podcast. Please subscribe. I'm asking you to subscribe. Let everybody know. Silicon Valley, we've been talking about that for the last couple of shows. Make sure you let people know more about it. God bless. See you next time.